Bonjour, mes amis. It's good to have everyone here with us this evening for this ongoing conversation, this ongoing thread, all of everything that has to do with the mitochondria and how it influences your well-being, be it the well-being of I want to excel and I want to run all the marathons, or the well-being of, I'm not feeling great and I want to figure out how my mitochondria can support my healing journey. This evening, I have the most wonderful Justin Harris with us to start these conversations. Justin, I'm always excited to have these chats with you because I think you, in the best of ways, keep us grounded and keep the audience grounded. And so the science is cool, the nerdy academics are cool, but what do we actually do with it? And so I'm really excited to learn from you this evening. How are you, sir?
I'm good and ditto because I think that it makes for a good dichotomy between you and me. And honestly, like the mitochondria, they're so important. They do so many different roles all at the same time. And they're really an important part of that innate intelligence of the body. You know, the body has
Mm-hmm.
so much just built-in wiring to perform so many tasks.
Mm-hmm.
And mitochondria, they do a lot of that. You know, they're directly responsible for all of the energy creation in all of our cells, except for
Yeah.
red blood cells, but we may get to that. So the healthier that you can keep these mitochondria,
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to directly implicate your ability to ward off disease because it
Yeah.
takes energy to keep disease at bay. It's
Yeah.
also going to translate to your ability to perform all the functions that a mammal ought to be able to perform. You can
Mm-hmm.
take energy and you can transform it into $1 million if you want. Right? You can take energy and you can transform it into an amazing physique, an amazing
Yeah.
career, the ability to build incredible relationships. All of these things take energy from us. And without those mitochondria, we do not have the energy required. So we got to
Yeah.
keep them healthy.
Yeah. So I wonder before we dive into, because for the audience just kind of know where we're going, we're first going to start with why the mitochondria is a little bit more susceptible to aging and how it contributes to aging before we get into the juice of, cool, what can you do about it? How can you apply this to your health? But before we go there, I have a quick question for the audience because I think most people who were raised within public school systems, they're sleeper cells. If their science teacher asks them, what is the mitochondria for, right? Their first response is what? Powerhouse of the cell. So I'm curious, audience, are you guys aware of anything else that the mitochondria does for us? And Justin gave us a little, if you were listening, Justin gave you all the cheat notes. But I'm curious if you know what outside of being the proverbial engine in the car, um, what the mitochondria does. So if you have any thoughts, please do toss them in. Yes, ma'am. And um, this is Napita. She will be with us this evening. Her sister's on a diet. She's not happy about it, so she'll be present. Um, so as we're kind of getting some answers from the audience, I wonder if I could offer one of my favorite analogies as to how I talk about the mitochondria. And I think, Justin, you and I can use this in a practical way to poke at it. Right. So mitochondria, I really like to think about like a kitchen. Okay. And think about the kitchen within your home. The kitchen serves in two different ways. First of all, it's the place that you bring all your groceries to. You chop them up, you cook them up, you do all the fun things, you bake them. And those groceries then eventually become a meal. And that meal feeds your family, just like the mitochondria, right? It takes the energy, it takes the sugar, and then it chops it up and does a bunch of fun stuff with it. And it gives you ATP or the energy, the meal that your body is then um, feasting off of. And Kamini, I see your answer and I love it because that's very true around the cell signaling. Yeah. And that's the second part of what I want to talk about, what the mitochondria does. And I would argue to an extent, one of the more important things the mitochondria does. So in your kitchen, most people will have a kitchen table, and that is where the meal is served. Right. And that is where all the family members will gather. And as they're consuming their meal, as they're consuming their energy, they have conversations. And I'm seeing this within our chat, right? Diana is saying regulates apoptosis. I love that fancy word. Nina is talking about signaling defense and danger, right? Kamini already mentioned cell signaling. So it's around this family table where all the family members are gathered and eating their meal that they're going to be sharing information. And it's the sharing of information, arguably, that's possibly one of the more important things that the mitochondria does, even though it was arguably latently discovered and not part of that science curriculum back in the day. Justin, do you want to talk a little bit around how the mitochondria supports within body communication?
Yeah, the mitochondria, one of the cool things about them is that they're both creators of our physiology and they're subject to our physiology as well. You know, a
Mhm,
lot of people in the chat have already used the word signaling. I love that
mhm,
because really they're sensors, right? They're sensing things from the environment
mhm,
and then they're deciding what to do with those signals. And those are both external and internal signals, right? So it's sensing things and it's kind of figuring out, should I create inflammation? Should I replicate? Should I make energy? What do I do with these signals that I have? So, one of the cool things about the mitochondria as well is that different cells have different energy requirements.
mhm,
And that really translates to the density of mitochondria within the cells. We know that our brains are a tremendous energy hog, right? Like 20 to
mhm,
25% of the ATP in the whole body is used up by our brain. The heart is also a brain, and the heart takes up
mhm,
a ton of the ATP as well. So it really
mhm,
kind of gives you an idea of why these are important for that baseline autonomic function in our body. The things that are really not consciously operating, they're subconsciously operating all the time. So when we're talking about aging, we need to understand that the mitochondria create energy. Then they create a waste product of that energy, right?
mhm,
So that's going to cause some issues. The more energy that your body makes, the more of that byproduct, that smoke from creating the
mhm.
fire. So we need to make sure that we're aware of that. We need to make sure that we're clearing these waste products, the reactive oxygen species, and then we need to make sure that we're constantly creating new mitochondria. If your
Mhm.
mitochondria become weak, that's going to translate to disease states because your body needs energy to fight off diseases. So I really think that there's more than one thing going on with the mitochondria. They get gummed up with toxins, the
Yeah.
membranes can become weak, but also we need to make sure that we build new ones all the time because as soon as that slows down, our rate of aging is going to accelerate by quite a ways.
Yeah.
So definitely, I mean, they're a big relevant factor for disease as well as healthy aging. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely. No, I think you very beautifully and succinctly put that. And that kind of sets the stage for this conversation of let's be a little bit more specific as to things that will age our mitochondria and how that then in turn translates to aging in the body. Because once we understand this, we can also start to understand how can we go about better supporting our mitochondria, right? Because I think as Justin, as you've really beautifully said, there's not going to be many people with walking around with like frank mitochondrial illness, right? And by that, I mean a primary illness within the mitochondria. If you have that, you've probably been to a doctor and diagnosed. That said, you probably have, especially if you're someone who's either older or separate to that managing a chronic disease, you probably have a lot of secondary illness, meaning it's not a direct cause. Oh, Robin's telling me my sound is garbled. Is that better, Robin and or anyone else who's listening?
You
I'm
sound
gonna,
completely fine for me, Dr. Kosterman.
it's fine for you. Okay. Perfect. Perfect. Okay. I'm seeing some other people. So Robin, it may just be your connection. And if it is your connection, our team can help you a little bit with that. Okay. Um, Right. So just going back to it in the sense of there might be a little bit of secondary injury in the sense it's not a primary diagnosis, right? But it's more secondary either to aging or the fact that your body's navigating an illness and the mitochondria tends to be very, very sensitive to that, right? So let's think through the ways our mitochondria can get injured. And the first way, let's go back to DNA because we're a genetic company, right? We know that the mitochondria has its own DNA. Unfortunately, it's not as well protected as the DNA you find in a regular cell. And so this means that anytime there's an assault on a mitochondria, it's at greater risk towards DNA damage, DNA mutation. What that means is remember, your mitochondria constantly is replicating and repairing because of its incredible energy output and the way it makes energy, right? And because of that, it's all the more sensitive to right? Not having proper DNA instructions to do that. So if it's not making a protein properly because that element of DNA was damaged, that means you're probably not going to be extracting energy efficiently, or maybe it's going to impact how your immune system is communicating. There's so many different things that can happen. Additional to that, right? And Justin, I wonder if you can explore this point. As that DNA is damaged and as some of those proteins are damaged, it also weakens the ability of the mitochondria to signal, hey, I'm not doing so well. You should probably get rid of me and make another one. Do you want to talk about mitophagy? Oh, I got that right. Do you want to talk about mitophagy?
Yeah, I mean, mitophagy is something that you want, right? You want
Yeah.
old damaged mitochondria to die off, just like you would want any damaged cell to die off, right? Autophagy, mitophagy. So there's a lot of things that can cause mitochondrial damage, and I think that things like, for example, poor sleep is like a really big factor there. Because all throughout the
Mm-hmm.
day, your body creates these waste products, and then when you go to sleep is when the body is supposed to do that cellular housekeeping. And a lot of people nowadays have such poor sleep because of cortisol dysregulation, circadian rhythm issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so that triggering of the actual cellular cleanup is no longer happening for a lot of people. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
gumming up the mitochondria with toxins and it's causing damage to the mitochondria. So we need to have strategies in place to increase mitophagy as well. And there's
Mm-hmm.
tons of great ways that you can do that, like uh,
Yeah.
intermittent fasting, for example, or even the
Mm-hmm.
use of some of these fasting mimetics is a very good
Yeah.
idea as well, like spermidine and PEA. I mean, there's a few things you can actually take that give you the same metabolites as if you just did like a 36-hour fast, but you can do it in a relatively fed state, right? So there's
Yeah.
ways that you can sort of hack that. Um, Exercise, just baseline weightlifting, hit training, that kind of thing. It encourages the creation of what's called biogenesis, right? Like mitochondrial biogenesis. So you create new and improved mitochondria.
Yeah.
So I really think that, too much inflammation, too many toxins, poor
Mm.
sleep, all of those things are really, really damaging to the
Yeah.
mitochondria. And once they get damaged, we have to clear those cells out and create new ones. And there's so many ways to
Mm-hmm.
do that with heat and cold and fasting. And some of these hormetic stressors are a great introduction because they directly impact mitochondria and help you to
Yeah.
create new ones. So have you seen similar patterns as far as like sleep and inflammation being like a pretty big deal with mitochondria?
Yeah. Well, I would say they're just inextricably linked, right? Like I think an easy sometimes I think an easy example that people can relate with a little bit more. They get a really bad night's sleep. Okay. The next day they wake up and they're probably going to notice that their appetite is really, really wacky. They're probably going to be, they may not be hungry first thing after they've gotten up of poor sleep, but then for the rest of the day, they're really craving food and they're wanting sugar. And then there's almost this chicken and egg that you're not eating properly. And then that makes it more difficult to have a good sleep the next night, right? So there's an element of chicken and egg, and that's a very relatable thing, right? For one reason or another, we've all experienced a night where we just don't sleep well, and we know what that can do to our appetite. So it's a little bit of an obvious connection. And part of that happens because when you don't get good sleep, you're not setting up your hormones, your neurotransmitters for success with appetite the next day. You're kind of starting a two-legged race with only one leg because you're trying to balance an appetite where you don't have the tools to do so. The mitochondria is very, very much similar, but in more subtle ways that we won't necessarily notice. You don't get that good sleep. It's not cleaned up. It is not only having to battle the fact that you didn't sleep well, you're probably going to need a bit more energy and of consequence to that, but you're going to be really gunky inside. Your body hasn't done that proper clean, and that really, really, really impacts the mitochondria. Let's go back to that kitchen analogy, right? If you prepare a meal for your family in your kitchen and you do not clean your kitchen, right? You don't clean the sink, the pots, the pans, the things. Can you get away for a day with, all of that stuff sitting in the sink? Sure. But after that day, if you don't tend that, you're going to start getting mold, you're going to start getting pests, your knives aren't going to be sharp, your cookware might rust. right? And that's very much what happens within chronic illness pictures. Everyone can kind of deal with a night here and there that isn't working out so well. Your body's resilient and will recover. But when you're sick or when you're consistently stressed and not giving your body what it needs, that kitchen, that mitochondria is getting dirty. And then that tends to create that chicken and egg situation where because of that, you don't have proper energy. Because of that, you don't have proper cell signaling, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, and once again, with these, the whole concept of it being epigenetic sensor, right? All
Hmm.
that we can control is what that input looks like. So we have to make
Yeah.
sure that we're having inputs that are consistent with high quality output,
Yeah.
right? You can only release that which you possess. So if we have
Hmm.
high quality input and we have high quality output, that's the relationship that we want. I think
Yeah.
exercise is a really good point to make here because, like, you and I had a discussion before this webinar about how quick people are to go to
Yeah.
the hacks, and the
Yeah.
hacks are great, and I'm guilty of
Mhm.
promoting the hacks. There's no doubt about it.
Totally.
But
Totally.
I've always
Me too.
brought it back
Yeah.
to this thing called moving from general to specific, right?
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, high quality sleep for the reasons that you just mentioned, or even just getting your exercise basics dialed in, because when you give your body a reason to create more energy, it's going to create more energy. So
Yeah.
imagine you don't work out at all and you start a workout routine. Well, you've signaled, right? This is epigenetics. You have now told your body we have a reason to create more ATP because we're having these bursts every day for an hour, 45 minutes,
Hmm.
whatever, where we're really expending a lot of ATP. So when you introduce these elements, the body and the mitochondria react and it goes, oh, we need
Hmm.
more mitochondria because we need more efficiency.
Yeah.
Literally, when you build muscle, they're so dense in mitochondria. Then you use the muscles and your body goes, okay,
Hmm.
we're going to adjust our baseline of ATP production. However, we are also talking about hormetic stresses when we're talking about exercise. So just be aware there's a balancing act and a homeostatic mechanism to all of the above. Enough exercise is going to improve your mitochondria. Too much is going to make it so that you're creating reactive oxygen species at a rate that your body may not be able to clear. Genetics play a big role in that. We know all about that with the SOD2 pathway.
Hmm.
But I think that it really comes down to the homeostatic mechanism,
Yeah.
right? Like getting some sunshine on your skin is great for the
Hmm.
mitochondria. Getting sunburned, right, and overdoing these genetic stressors is going to have
Yeah.
the opposite effect, and it's going to be creating a lot of these free radicals.
Yeah.
So again, at the very beginning of the call, I said innate intelligence of the body. All of that homeostasis conversation is about the intelligence that's built right in. And yeah, sleep, food, the real
Hmm.
basics are where you need to start before you get crazy with supplements and all these
Yeah.
different things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one point I'd also like to bring into this conversation, because I think with mitochondria, sometimes people try and chase down, let me support my mitochondria without the bigger picture in mind. So what do I mean by this? I think sometimes it's really, really important to get your sleep and your diet and your exercise and your supplements under control. And I think there's also sometimes really important to get the bigger health picture under control as well. If you're sitting here, if you've come to this webinar because you're experiencing chronic illness, so for example, you're experiencing long haul COVID, you're experiencing recovery from or a journey with cancer, anything like that, you'll probably be hearing a lot about the mitochondria because it's so involved in not only how these diseases come to be, but one of the more significant consequences and one of the more significant pathways to healing, right? But if you're not then engaging with a practitioner who can tell you how to intelligently support not only whatever the bigger health concern is, but separate to that, right? How the mitochondria might work into that, I would say you're doing yourself a disservice, right? Because I think especially now that all that we know about in medicine, there's so much to be done, and you want a really focused care plan. And Justin, I think you got to that, right? Like I think biohacks are really important. I love how empowered people can be in their own healthcare by listening to webinars like this, by leveraging Dr. Google, by talking to experts. It's wonderful. But remember, you always have to come back to you and your health goals. Yeah.
You kind of just triggered something in me that was like, it's a cool way to look at that. Like COVID obviously gets, painted as far as what on earth did we all just go through here? But
We.
if you were to look at COVID as an epigenetic input, right? Like
Mm.
something from the outside that came in and caused, different signaling in your body, that stress signal and the cytokine storm and all that. Kind of
Hmm.
a cool way to look at it. Like, this is something that impacted our genetic expression. So now let's go ahead and once again double down on our positive inputs, because you can only release that which you possess. I've never thought about
Hmm.
it that way until just now when you were talking about that.
Oh, I love it. I love that. No, it's important. I think COVID was also a time that many people got to reset. I know a lot of people who got healthier and a lot of people who did not. And so
Yeah.
it was that pause that many people needed. Before we continue on, I want to, if the powers that be, if you can pop up the questionnaire. So for those that are new joining us, every webinar we do ask the question of why are you here? Justin and myself only really show up to support your learning, to support your understanding. And so we really want to make sure as we go through this, we're speaking to what you want. So the first question we asked was, have you ever experienced persistent fatigue, which is a big indicator of something larger or something specific to mitochondria happening? And about, oh, mon Dieu, 20% of our audience is saying on the regular. And then about 60% of our audience is saying frequently to occasionally. So we have a lot of tired people out there. And so I hope that we say something today that inspires rest or engagement with someone that can help you figure out how to get some rest. We asked the question because I think this is going to be popular, and Justin, I know you're passionate about this, so we'll be talking about it later. Are you taking any supplements specific to your mitochondrial health? A large portion of the audience is taking CoQ10, which is a very explicit cofactor in that process, especially for people who are on statins, a very compromised cofactor. About 25% of our audience is taking NAD precursors. We'll talk through that as well. 17, almost 20% of our audience says they're taking other. I'm really, really curious. I'm guessing methylene blue is going to be amongst those others. But if you're someone that put other, please toss into the chat what that other is. I'm always very curious as to what people are on. We have about 30% of our audience that's saying no, they're not taking anything. Um, Let's see. The next question we asked, what most concerns you about aging? Because that is part of tonight's conversation. 40% of our audience, cognitive decline. Yeah. So let's talk maybe just after this, how mitochondria plays into cognitive decline, and then strategies that we can use to really offset that. 25%, or I guess another 30% is saying chronic disease. So again, we'll continue to talk through that one. And for the audience, if you are struggling with that, don't ever hesitate to reach out to us. We want to be of service and support to you because we have great understanding of genes and how that can play into recovery from various chronic diseases. The next question is, what would you like to optimize first when considering all of this mitochondria fun? Okay. And brain, again, brain and physical energy are top amongst that. So Justin will make sure we have to really hit on that today. And the last question was just asking people how aware they are of the role of mitochondria in disease and aging. 50% is saying somewhat. So I hope by the close of this, you know a bit more. We have done a lot of webinars on the mitochondria, and we'll make sure the powers that be put them into the chat so that you as well can gain access to that information. Um, so, Justin, why don't we, excuse me, before we dive into the beautiful little world of supplements, and we're definitely going to have a conversation around methylene blue because I'm seeing it a lot in the comments, and I'm also seeing a question from, who is the question from? I believe Diane. She's asking what exactly is methylene blue. So we'll leave that as a bit of a teaser. Okay. But let's get to that. So let's first talk about cognitive decline and the mitochondria and how the two are really related. So something I think you've already said is that um, organs that use a lot of energy, brain being the biggest one, right? They require a lot of mitochondria. So talk to us a little bit about how aging and mitochondrial decline will lend to lack of cognitive prowess.
Yeah, your brain is an unbelievably complicated organism. There's a lot of electrical
Amazing.
activity going on in
Mhm.
there. And same with the heart, right? So the heart is considered one of three brains. You've got the gut, you've got the heart, and you've got the one between your ears. So anything that requires a lot of electrical conductivity to perform its functions, right? The communication between neurotransmitters, all of that is really electricity dependent. That's why if you're mineral depleted, you have a lot of brain fog, right? Like your brain really needs minerals. It really needs amino acids. There's a few things that keep that electricity going. And remember that when we're talking about mitochondria, really, I mean, we're talking
Mm.
about batteries. I mean, we're talking about things that
Mhm.
charge up the electricity in the body. When we get to a point of mitochondrial decline, mitochondrial dysfunction, we have a lot less electricity to go off of that basic adenosine triphosphate that every cell in your brain requires to run off of.
Mm.
You're operating in a deficit. And
Mm.
that's going to start to show up. You're going to start to forget names or have difficulty with, speech and any area of cognition. So, really, mitochondria and ATP production are directly correlative there. You need enough ATP to run your brain because it's very electrical. And I'll tell you, when I had issues with energy production because I was on antibiotics and different things,
Mhm.
I've talked about it on these webinars before. That was one of the main things that I noticed was just
Mm.
constant brain fog, trying to remember stuff.
Mm.
The fact that I'm on these webinars and speaking relatively fluently is a miracle at this point. And I did a lot of work on it, as
Yeah.
far as like adding in minerals and doing intermittent fasting. And I'll tell you, increasing
Mhm.
detoxification was actually one of the main things that I did there.
Mm.
Inflammation and detoxification are huge factors when it comes to your
Mhm.
body's ability to make the electricity. Um, and then using devices, right? Using brain tap, doing breath work, using ketones, nootropic ingredients, and getting good quality sleep as well was definitely a big needle mover for me as well when it comes to cognitive
Yeah.
decline. But anything that you can do to increase ATP, like even a simple creatine, which I know we're getting into the supplements in a bit, but when you have sleep deprivation, taking some creatine will give you the direct precursors. It will help you
Mhm.
to create more ATP because it gets
Yeah.
broken down, right? So
Yeah.
ATP is a triphosphate. It breaks down into DP, which is a diphosphate. Creatine phosphate comes along and repairs that
Mhm.
triphosphate. It repairs the molecule. So if you have cognitive decline or you're sleep deprived, a little bit of creatine can actually go a long way there. But I
Mhm.
mean, again, exercise, detox, all of these things are going to matter for brain function.
Yeah. 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 No, I like that summary. I like in particular that commentary of the three brains, and how invaluable mitochondria are to them. And I also really liked that you spoke to take care of the mitochondria. It's not just focusing on mitochondria alone, right? You referenced a lot that has to do with inflammation and detox because both of those are things that the mitochondria, if you're inflamed or not cleaning your body properly, your mitochondria is going to be marinating in a cesspool. And do you want your kitchen in a cesspool? Absolutely not. And so I'd really encourage for those who are on the call right now, I don't know if you have your DNA 360 ready or handy, but I'd really encourage if you're curious as to your body's capacity to support or quell inflammation, manage inflammation, or your body's capacity to detox, I'd really encourage you going to the anti-inflammatory section. Within our report, you're going to see four different reports. One that will speak specific to mitochondria, right? How your mitochondria is able to clean itself. But you'll also dive into a few other ones that are really detox mechanisms that help. What is that? What is the bath that your mitochondria are bathing in? Is your kitchen naturally dirty, and you have to work a little bit harder at cleaning it up, or is it easily cleaned by the systems you have? So looking at the reports for glutathionization, so many syllables, guys. Glutathionization, methylation, right? Those are going to be really, really important in understanding, is your body naturally very well able to clean itself? Or do you need to be doing additional things to support that cleaning before you even dive into some of the mitochondrial supports? Yeah. So Justin, why don't we, unless you have a thought cooking,
I
why
had a
don't we
quick
start?
thought.
Oh, let's hear
Yeah.
it. It's the kitchen.
Um,
Let's serve dinner.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you reference like if the kitchen is naturally dirty, right? That would represent the SOD2 pathway that I mentioned earlier. And there's a connective tissue there that I didn't mention yet. So the SOD2 pathway is an antioxidant pathway that exists for the mitochondria. That's how your mitochondria clear free radicals. One of the things that really supports that pathway is actually melatonin.
Mm.
Melatonin is one of the body's primary antioxidants. It's twice as powerful as even vitamin E, and it really supports that SOD2 pathway. So again, if your sleep is poor and you have suboptimal melatonin production, which most of that is made in your gut, all these things
Mhm.
are connected, then you're going to have less SOD2 activity as well. If you're genetically compromised on the SOD2 pathway and you don't sleep well, then you're that much more compromised because
Yep.
melatonin is directly used in that pathway. So just know every one of these systems is relevant. Every one leads into the next one. Gut, sleep, methylation, all of the above are going to matter for your mitochondria. There's not one piece that doesn't touch on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And before we jump into supplements, even though it sounds really scary to hear it's all connected, and if you suck in this one spot, it's going to impact everything else. Hear the flip of that. If you improve sleep, it's going to impact all of that. If you improve your diet, it's going to impact all of that. Remember, as scary as it can sound to hear these mitochondrial pathways, especially if you have suboptimal ones. So for SOD2, if you're seeing any T's slightly on the suboptimal side, right, it's important to remember that fixing even just one small thing, sleep, exercise, it's going to have a lot of impact as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and quickly here, because in the chat,
Hmm.
says, so should you take melatonin in order to support the SOD2 pathway? That's not what I'm saying as far as like supplementing with melatonin. I'm speaking more to the natural production of it and making sure that your circadian rhythm as well as your gut health are both on point so that your
Mm.
body's getting the proper release of melatonin. And once again, remember, while you're sleeping is when that cellular detox happens as well. So it's all mapped out, but I don't necessarily recommend jumping on melatonin supplementation for that same reason.
Perfect. Good
Yeah.
answer. Love it. Okay. So why don't we talk about supplements then? What are your, I guess, I'll open up with what are the more popular mitochondrial supplements, and then maybe we talk about our more favored mitochondrial supplements. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a big long list, right? Because it starts from like creatine, like I mentioned, and
Hmm.
essential fatty acids. I mean, those would be kind of the basics that without those, I wouldn't go towards the rest of these things. I would
Mm.
keep the basics on point
Mm.
because your body needs the omega 3s. And I'll tell you, I'm using something called Fatty 15 right now, which is a
Mhm.
really interesting one. If you guys haven't had a chance to look at it, it's C15 is the first fatty acid to be discovered in like 90 years. And it's actually a little incremental component of full fat dairy that our body can't make on its own, and it actually needs it. And it's about 3 times more potent than normal omega 3s are for all the
Mm.
cellular functions that it translates to. So that's brain health, mitochondrial health, etc. So fatty 15 is a pretty cool one as far as EFAs are concerned. Then we transition to these NAD precursors. So there's there's debate about which one is best because there's so many different things. And NAD in and of itself, you wouldn't really take as an oral supplement because the molecule is a bit too big to kind of work its way past the membrane. So we rely on these precursors to up NAD production. And NAD is really important for your body's ability to make ATP. So, there's NR, right? Like nicotinamide riboside, there's NMN, there's D
Mhm.
ribose, there's simple B3 niacinamide. All of
Mhm.
these things translate to your body's ability to create more NAD, which naturally tends to decline as we get older, right? So,
Mhm.
this is one of those things as far as mitochondrial aging. I'll tell you, I personally am a big fan of like NR and NMN together. You can actually get them as combos. The most cost-effective one, though, would be D-ribose. It's just a kind of a sugar extract.
Mhm.
Not bad for you. It's just used for the creation of ATP. And
Mhm.
B3, if you want a more cost-effective way of going about it, D-ribose and B3, that's a great combo. If you want to get a little bit more advanced, you can do the precursors being NR and NMN. Then there's another thing to consider here being NAD has an enzyme that breaks it down called NMNT. That's the enzyme that kind of catalyzes NAD. So if we're supporting the creation of it, but we're not targeting the catalyzation of it, then you still may end up low on NAD. Once again, all of these things always have to be so complex. So there's actually great ingredients like 5-amino-1-MQ, for example, is an amazing peptide. It's a small molecule peptide that helps to inhibit NMNT production. So if you want to go crazy on this, this is the point of the webinar where we go crazy.
Yeah.
Then you would use the precursors, and you would also use something like a 5-amino-1-MQ to inhibit the NMNT. And that's a really great NAD upregulation pathway. So maybe check those out if you suspect that you're aging because of low NAD levels. That does happen naturally. Then we get into the methylene blues of the world, which seems to be popular in the comments. So we might as well give it a shot. So methylene blue is interesting because it operates on something called the electron transport chain. And that's a really important part of how the body actually creates ATP in the Krebs cycle. Different molecules can lend electrons to the chain so that your body can use them to create energy. And methylene blue is one of those. I'm slightly hesitant to recommend methylene blue right off the start because it can have some deleterious effects on things like serotonin. And there's a dose dependent thing going on here with methylene blue as well, because too much can be a bit toxic, right? There's a toxicity threshold with methylene blue.
Yeah.
However, if you do especially have like an actual mitochondrial disorder, like if you have issues like an ATP issue genetically, for example, improving that electron transport chain can have a big effect on your body's ability to create energy. Methylene blue can also help with the ROSs, right? The reactive oxygen species. It can help to clear them a little bit faster. To me, you may be a little bit better off with the hydrogen water, things like that to activate the NRF2 pathway. That's like a really mitochondria specific antioxidant pathway. And it doesn't have a toxicity limit. It's just that it comes from magnesium. So there's a bowel tolerance limit if you were to go crazy there.
Yeah.
I'm sure I left something out, Dr. K. What are you thinking with regard to supplements?
Well, this was beautifully comprehensive. I just kind of wanted to focus in on 2 points. I think the first point, I really loved that you kind of called out some of the potential pitfalls of methylene blue, because I think I've been in this space, kind of this wellness space for long enough where people are trying to biohack their health, and I've seen a lot of people hurt themselves because they've taken a strong agent without fully knowing that where does the therapeutic window start, meaning at what dose can I actually see benefit? And the flip of that, where does that window end, where a dose would actually begin to harm me? And while I can't say I've seen it specific to methylene blue, I've seen it very specific to any supplement that tends to get very trendy in the market. And this includes vitamin D. I have seen people hurt themselves with vitamin D because they weren't doing it properly. And so I don't say this as a sales pitch for myself or the clinic. I say it as a sales pitch for your wellness. Please make sure as you bring these agents into your life, you are talking with someone who knows about your health and who is qualified to counsel on it. Because supplements, while they may be available over the counter, methylene blue is a little bit of a different story, but while they may be available over the counter, that doesn't mean you can be taking as much as you want for whatever reasons you want. Okay, it's important that you know what you're doing and you're not harming yourself and you're benefiting yourself. Okay. The other thing that I really wanted to toss in there, and this is in particular for the people who've shown up with chronic illness or chronic fatigue, anything on that kind of long-standing, I'm just aiming to get back to normal spectrum. I think the only thing that Justin really missed there, and I don't think he missed it, it's just that he was focusing on the big guns. What I think is very important for the chronically ill population is that before you dive into many of these supplements, I'd say creatine and omegas, have at it. But before you dive into some of the more complex ones, you really want to think through other cofactors within the mitochondria and ones that are needed for energy production. So Justin touched on a few. A lot of the B as in Bob, vitamins are very important, but so are trace minerals. So for example, with long haul COVID, we know there's a lot of mitochondrial disruption and there's a lot of research, and we're talking like biochemical kind of in the weeds research that speaks to long haul folk for a variety of reasons don't have access to those trace minerals. And that is part of the disruption, right? Just like you might also want to be considering if you're in that chronic illness space, supporting yourself with an acetyl L-carnitine or alpha lipoic acids, both of which in kind of chronic disease states are shown to be very depleted and of consequence very deleterious to the activity of the mitochondria, right? So I think if you're coming from a chronic illness space, make sure you're supporting before you get any of those fancy things with the basics, because it's kind of like, I don't know, trying to cook. I can't think of an analogy. I was going to bring it back to the kitchen, but it's not going to work out. Just be mindful that there's no sense building your fire to cook something if you don't already have the material to actually be cooked. Okay. So you need the food prep before you start your fire. Okay. So make sure that you're focused on that. Be that through us, we have a functioning clinic. We can support that, or through your provider and what you know of your health and what they know of their health. Yeah. Any other
Yeah.
thoughts, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Like, I could probably just continue to rattle off until the end of this because there's urolithin A, for example. I saw people in
Yeah,
the
I saw that in
comments
the
mentioning
comments
that.
too. Yeah. Do you
And
want to talk
I,
to
I
that
think
one?
it's, yeah,
Mhm.
sure. Let's touch on urolithin A. And honestly, there's a way to improve the efficacy of urolithin A as well by combining it with akkermansia. There's a cool, like
Mm.
almost a positive feedback loop that you can get going on there. So urolithin A, I mean, if you're unfamiliar with it, it's an extract of typically pomegranates, and it's a postbiotic. So you really would need a certain kind of makeup to your gut bacteria to create urolithin A out of pomegranates. And if you don't have that particular bacteria, then you'll basically you can eat as many pomegranates as you want until you have diarrhea, but you're not going to create urolithin A. And urolithin
Challenge
A, the
accepted.
yes, and the postbiotic will in fact cause mitophagy, right? So it's directly implicating that pathway in a good way. So when you combine urolithin A with akkermansia, it actually nourishes the terrain. Like it makes it so that your body is more able to sort of use the urolithin A. And akkermansia, it goes by AKK. It's like a probiotic strain. So those two together create that positive feedback loop, and it's pretty cool. So I recommend maybe dabbling in that as well if you are going to use urolithin A, because it makes it so that your gut is able to use more of it. It makes it more bioavailable. So urolithin A is great. Um, Carbon 60 is a peptide. I'm not officially allowed to recommend peptides, but carbon 60 is very interesting in its anti-inflammatory as well as its antioxidant properties. And full disclosure, I've dabbled in it off and on. I have a suboptimal SOD2 pathway. I have two T's there.
Mm.
So it's reduced by like 70% in its capacity. So I really try to improve my mitochondrial clearance of toxins. And I do phase 1 and phase 2 detox, right? Because I encourage sweating and I also take certain things that kind of get the
Mm.
toxins out of the cells in the first place. So carbon 60 is great. PQQ is great.
Mhm.
CoQ10, a lot of you are already using it. In particular, ubiquinol, which is like a special form of CoQ10. That's really useful. Um,
Mhm.
and on we go. But
Yeah,
definitely
there
stick
we
with the
go.
basics first. Get the fish
Yeah.
oils and things ready, and your diet too. I mean, I think that the government, and don't get me started, but when they suggested everybody eat low salt and low fat, I think that a lot of people
Oh.
suffer mitochondrial damage because now it's minerals, which Dr. K
Mhm.
touched on, and fatty acids.
Yeah.
When we restrict the literal things that create membranes in the body, we're doing a major disservice. Even if your genes suggest you should eat low fat, nobody is saying eat no fat, except for the government in the 90s and what have you.
Well,
Your body needs that
big
range.
food as well, right?
Yes.
It was an element of big food. I don't think it was government alone. I think there was a conspiracy between the two, but we'll we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Regardless, fat, spectacular, good fat. Let's actually, you know what? Let's dive into this a little bit because I think there's a little bit of truth in the advice of be mindful of salt and fat for no other reason than it really translates to be mindful of processed and restaurant food, because both processed and restaurant food. So restaurant food, they will salt everything to death because that way it will taste good. They will also fry everything to death. And the moment you fry a fat, right, you're going to be getting more of those deleterious oxidative fats. So I would say when you think about fats and salt, think about restaurant or processed, things you're getting out of a package, because the advice is 1,000,000% true there. The advice is not true when you're in your kitchen and cooking real food, assuming you're not cooking with a pound of salt and with a deep fryer, all the
Yeah,
time
well,
fryers.
there's also a difference between like table salt, like just obviously filled with pollution and microplastics and things versus like a beautiful sea salt that's really mineral
Mm.
dense and from a protected area. Like I actually use three different types of salt. I
Mm.
do the Redmond salt, which is actually a
Mhm.
mined salt, and then I do Celtic sea salt, and I do Colima. It comes from like
Mm.
Colima, Mexico, like an Aztec sea salt. I like to mix it up because then you get a lot of different sources of minerals. And then I add magnesium and I add beam and stuff on top of that, maybe a little shilajit. Minerals make a big difference. Like I noticed that in my energy levels when I really started paying attention.
Oh my gosh, I love that. So we need to see like we're gonna have to publish your stack one day of like this is what I take, but also include the intelligence that you embed within your food. Like I love, and it's extra, but I love it. I love the fact that you're sourcing your salt from different spaces.
Yeah,
That makes
of
me very
course.
happy.
Yeah, mineral complexity, right? You might as well. And some of
Yeah.
them are like ground and some of them are more coarse. So I'll use them in different kind of aspects of cooking and things as
Hmm.
well. I put salt in my coffee because coffee will make you pee out sodium.
Hmm.
It's a replenishment process that's pretty much ongoing. But I'll tell you the brain fog and different things, night and day difference since I started taking
Hmm.
salt seriously and giving it its due respect.
I love that so very much. We're gonna have to get you on a webinar and just talk about salt.
Yeah.
All right. On that note, shall we transition into some Q&A? Does
Yeah.
that make
Looks like we
sense?
got a few here.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So Nicholas, I hope I'm saying that right, Nicholas. Nicholas said, another chicken and egg question. We love those. We're grateful for them. I sleep poorly because what I suspect is a dysautonomia. So what he's really saying is something's going on in his nervous system. It's more active. It's more in that fight or flight state than ideal, is my suspicion. Um, does it make sense to look into mitochondrial issues first, or more the dysautonomic dysregulation? In other words, can mitochondrial deficiencies cause that, or is it the other way around? Yeah. Where do you want to start, Justin? Maybe I'll bring us home.
Gosh, chicken or the egg is
Yeah.
is absolutely correct on that one because like I mentioned earlier about mitochondria, they're creators of our physiology and they're subject to
Mhm.
all things related to our physiology as well. So if you have poor sleep, it's going to impact detox, hormones, all of the above, right? Cortisol regulation. Then the cortisol dysregulation and the hormones and the detox are going to turn around and impact your sleep, right? So to me, it's like there's these pillars. We have to have sleep correct. We have to have diet correct. We have to have exercise correct. We have to have detox correct. So I always start with those pillars. We have to fix those because there's going to be the trickle down effect to all the systems that they impact, which is every system. So to me, I mean, if you were able to correct your circadian rhythm, probably your hormones and your detox and these other kind of downstream effects would correct themselves because of that. Um, but the thing is, if you improve your mitochondria, you're also going to improve your sleep, right? So I don't know that there's a wrong answer here. I think it's just positive action towards the result that you want. I always call this an alignment process, eh? I said,
Mhm.
we're in Canada. Oh my God. Um, so
People showed up to a Canadian webinar. It is what it
yeah,
is. Continue
it
on
is
with your
what it is.
poutine. Just eat
Yeah.
your poutine and march on.
We need to operate in alignment, right? So the more of these little
Yeah.
segments that you choose to kind of seize control over, it's going to pull everything else into an alignment. If you get a workout in when you go to bed, you're tired now because you did a workout. Well, now we have a couple of things in alignment, and you'll find that your gut works better and your brain will be less foggy.
Mhm.
So really, the more of these things you could pull into alignment, the better it's all going to go. But I don't know which one of those would have come first. It
Mm,
could have been either of the above, but definitely correct
mm.
that sleep issue, and you'll see a lot of magical stuff happen with your physiology. What do you think, Dr. K?
Yeah, no, I think that's a comprehensive and a beautiful answer. The only thing I would add, Nicholas, would be we don't know the history of how long you've been struggling with this, and we don't know the nuance of how dramatic some of these nervous system issues are. And I would offer, if you've been struggling for a while, a few months, or you feel like you're struggling in a very dramatic way, this is kind of impacting life, I would really encourage you to go speak with a doctor. And again, I don't say that from a sales perspective. I say that more from a, if there's something more clinically complex than day-to-day life stresses and poor lifestyle and diet habits are creating this, right? It's better to know that now and to address that now versus not. And so if you're looking for a clinic, and I say this tenderly, right? Because I think through how sometimes people will go to their doctors and say, "Hey, I'm not feeling well," the doctor will run a blood panel and they're like, "Your blood's fine, so it's probably just in your head," and how profoundly dismissive and unkind that is. So if you're looking for a space that will listen to you, shout out to us because we'll happily listen, and we take these things very seriously. We don't dismiss it if you have good blood work. There's a lot more going on there. So I just really encourage, especially if you're in a space of struggle, reaching out to someone to get an opinion on what to do, because if there's something that needs medical intervention, it's better you know that now versus a few years from now. Okay. Yeah. All right. Oh, Justin, I think you're going to like this question. It's from Nina. Hi, Nina. We see you here often. Um, what is your opinion on breath holding? It supposedly strengthens mitochondrial antioxidant systems, biogenesis, lung adaptation. EPO is secreted within minutes or weeks, and anxiety is reduced if CO2 tolerance is then increased. Ooh, all the things. I love it, Nina. I love it. But they say you should exhale first and then hold your breath. So Justin, do you want to speak briefly? Why don't we help our audience first just kind of talk about the incredible power that some certain breath techniques can have? And then do you want to speak specifically to, do we know if it will impact mitochondria or not?
Yeah, breath work is one of those baseline things I recommend. Pretty much every
Mm,
patient I've ever had is doing breath work. I have them doing breath work. That's like day one stuff that I recommend because I tend to give, little homework pieces to people. And I start pretty simple, hydrate,
mm,
move your body, those kind of basics. And among the basics is always breath work because it's
mm,
always available. It's totally free to do. It only takes a few minutes every day. And there's so many different ways to do it. There's a lot of diversity as well. When we inhale, it tends to trigger the sympathetic activity in our body. When we exhale, it tends to do the opposite, the parasympathetic activity in the body. Same with when we use the nose versus the mouth. I mean, there's actually quite a bit going on with regard to breath and CO2 retention, etc.
mhm,
I think that breath holding is actually a pretty good call. And I think you can do it on either the in or the out breath. I dabble in all of the above. I'll hold on the in breath, I'll hold on the out breath. I would say be careful though. There's always warnings that come with this because you will be lightheaded. Don't be
mhm.
holding your breath while you're driving, you guys. Like, you know what I mean? Be in a safe
He says
environment.
this because someone's tried it.
I actually have, and it's a bad call. Um, but I'm experienced, I'm a biohacker. Um, but as far as holding it in on the in breath, I mean, yeah, like EPO, it really helps with your red blood cell count.
Mhm,
You can use it on the in breath and the out breath. It's just that it's going to have totally different effects. Uh,
mhm.
so I encourage it. I don't see a reason why not. What do you think, Dr. K?
No, I love it. I think, and part of the reason I love it is, so when you look from a traditional medicine perspective, in particular, if you go back to more Ayurvedic or yogic or Hindu traditions, there's a lot of breath work embedded there. And I think that speaks to how strongly it can influence our nervous system and how strongly it can influence our immune system and our overall physiology. It's one of those things that for thousands of years has stayed embedded within those medicine traditions as opposed to something that's weeded out, right? Do we have stronger and more pointed medicines nowadays? Absolutely. But that doesn't negate the technologies where thousands of years they've been validated. And I think, as we especially start to understand a bit more around the America's First Nations, we're seeing a lot of breath work within their medicinal tradition as well. So it's not just, I guess, within kind of the Indian diaspora that this was discovered. It's also within American diasporas, and which is so very neat that something as basic and everyone has access to as breath can be so powerful in that sense. So no, I love
Yeah.
that.
I also think that hypoxia, right? Like
Hmm.
when you're low, when your oxygen is low, I do think that it's a contributor to most major disease states, honestly. I
Hmm.
mean, if you think about how we all sit, and it's like our
Yeah.
diaphragm is kind of compressed, and then our hip flexors are also compressed at the same time. So we're really not saturating the cells properly with O2 anymore, which is alkaline,
Mm.
and it has a lot of different benefits to the body.
Hmm.
So, when you open up the diaphragm and you get the thoracic section of your spine to be kind of more open, I think that it gives your body a lot more oxygen availability, which it uses to make energy. So you could say
Hmm.
that the mitochondria as a downstream are being benefited from your ability to breathe properly. And we know, I mean, the HPA axis, stress
Hmm.
response, all of that stuff is
Yeah.
really relevant for energy production. So I
Yeah.
think that it's definitely a good call. I hope everybody on this call is doing breath work in some form because it's so good for you.
Yeah. I love that. All right. Shelly has our next question. I'll take this one. Um, she's taking a genetic based supplement, so I would imagine something that's been custom designed, and then asking if we make individual supplements. So I guess this is a bit of a sales plug, but yes, we do. So ours tends to be at least present. It's a multifactorial consideration. So we do consider genes, and then we also do talk to the person, say, hey, what outside of genes is going on in your world? So it's a very uh, supplement that's tailored specifically and exclusively to you and your life situation. And so it's something that will also change over time. Right. Because as you begin to shift your health, as you begin to support things, body's needs will change. You won't need to support things as much, and you'll have to support other things differently. So it's made both through understanding of DNA and then also a clinician's understanding of you. So I find them very powerful. And so that's something, if you want more information, Shelley, don't hesitate to reach out to us and we can support you working into that system. Yeah. All right. Marianne has a question for us. Hi, Marianne. We see you a lot often too. Um, she's asking if we can discuss red light therapy for mitochondrial support. Yes, sir. We talked about this a bit before, Justin. Let's hear it.
Yeah, I love red light therapy. And I will say right off the bat that it also does qualify as one of those hormetic stressors, right? So this is not something that you want to be doing for hours out of every day
Mm.
because balancing act is real, right? And
Mm.
any time that you improve your mitochondria's ability to produce ATP, you're also going to improve the amount of free radicals that can be created there as well. So too much is too much, but the right amount is amazing, right? So the mitochondria, they react to environmental stimulus, like we talk about. They're epigenetic sensors. So there's photoreceptors there, and they react to light stimulus that you give them. So red light therapy is excellent because it goes deep enough into the body to actually impact the mitochondria and specifically the electron transport chain that I brought up. So it's a direct thing. It helps you to increase ATP, and that's very useful. It also increases these different genes that are associated with like longer term mitochondrial biogenesis. I think it's called PGC1 alpha, if I'm correct on that. And that's the genes that get triggered that help with biogenesis of the mitochondria. So it's very valuable there. Not to mention, it's also increasing nitric oxide, right? And blood flow matters a ton there for the health of the entire body. It increases collagen production. It can actually ward off things like seasonal affective disorder to an extent, right? Just because you can kind of turn the sunshine on. So there's a lot of things that it's doing all at once. And definitely the mitochondria are being impacted with red light therapy. I have a couple of different kind of strategies that I do. I actually have one big device in my sauna,
Mm.
and I have another device that I put in front of my vibration plate because this is biohacking 101. You got to combine stuff if you want to be a real biohacker. So the shaky plate gives
You're on
you the
top of all the
lymphatic drainage.
Texuticals.
Well, you might as well, if you own them, you might as well do it all at once.
Mhm.
Not with everything though, but just with some of these things. It's kind of a time hack. So it's like when you're on the shaky plate, you get lymphatic drainage and you get circulation benefits and things. And you might as well be pointing that red light right at your body while you do that to get even more circulation.
Mm.
Circulation is your friend. Um,
Mm.
there's a lot of knockoffs out there though, so I don't recommend just going on Amazon and buying any red light, because it's like a Christmas tree bulb that they put into a lamp and they say it's red light therapy, and it might not be. So just make sure you're getting your devices from reputable companies. Otherwise, you might be not getting any benefits at all.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. Okay. Sandy has our next question for us, Justin. So Sandy's asking, you mentioned niacinamide. Does taking nicotinic acid have the same effect? And then a follow-up question to add to her previous question. Um, can the nicotinamide be hard on the liver? Yeah. So nicotinamide, niacinamide, is a form of B3 and it's considered a non-flushing form. So if you take B3 and it's the nicotinic acid form, what it does is it can vasodilate you. Words. And if you go above a certain dose, what happens is it's kind of like getting a really, really, really big hot flash. So you'll take it usually within 20 minutes, assuming an empty stomach. Your pores will start to dilate. You'll go super red. You'll feel super hot. And some people get really anxious, right? Because that's an uncomfortable feeling, right? That quick flushing. It's not harmful per se. Some people seek it out because there are cardiovascular benefits of it. But if you're taking the niacinamide, you forego that, you don't get that same reaction. So the question is, are the two equivalent when it comes to supporting mitochondria? And the answer is yes, you still do get the same benefit from it. You don't really necessarily get the cardioprotective, or at least some of the cardio inputs that you would have otherwise, but and some of the detox to a certain extent that comes when you sweat. But outside of that, by and large, yes, it goes down those same pathways that Justin's gone over. Now, in regards to liver concerns, so if you're asking that question, you've either heard horror stories because people have overdosed, or you do have your own liver concerns. If you have your own liver concerns, you need to talk with your doctor. I don't have advice beyond go talk to your doctor, because you need to know exactly what those liver concerns are. If it's more because you've heard horror stories of the internet, again, this is why you should talk to your doctor about supplementation. But the answer is yes. Some people will try to, just like Justin said, like, hey, if you have a red light, you probably shouldn't be doing 11 hours a day. Some people will decide, hey, if B3 is good for you, I'm going to take 11 hours a day of it. Um, and so I think most people recommend not really going above a gram a day. That tends to be in the more well-tolerated spaces. And I think once you're going above 2 or 3 grams, give or take, that's where you get in the risk territory. And so really, I would never go above a gram unless you're being watched and working with a doctor who has very specific reasons and specific research as to why you as a person should be going above that. Um, Justin, do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
No, but I will say that generally liver health, I think, is not talked about enough because of how many different
Mm,
things that it does. You know, it's like
mm,
it's one of these things, right, where people talk about it in kind of a linear fashion, like, well, we know
mm,
that the liver takes out toxins. But I
mm,
mean, really, like the liver also plays a really big role in thyroid health, because like 97% of the thyroid hormone that your thyroid gland makes is T4, and it's
mm,
totally inactive, right? So it has to be transferred into T3, right? So there's the tyrosine and there's the iodine, and there's four of them, and the liver, certain enzymes will take one of those away, so it's now T3 instead of T4. If your liver is compromised, if there's a lot of congestion in your liver, your doctor will be like, well, you have hypothyroidism. And you go, oh,
Mm.
so my thyroid gland isn't making enough thyroid. But it's really because your liver is full of toxins and it's congested and gummed up. And so a lot of that conversion is not happening anymore. It also plays a really big role in like bile flow. I mean, your digestion is dependent on your liver's ability to produce bile and send it to the gallbladder so that it can intelligently release it when you take in fats. So there's a lot going on with the liver. It's a more
Mm.
intelligent organ than you think it is. And honestly, I think that if it gets gummed up, it's problematic for lots of different stuff. So take care of your liver, folks. I use like Toka
Mm,
and um, even just basic hydration strategies and trying to keep the pharmaceuticals away from you if you can. I think
mhm.
keeping your liver healthy is actually one of those kind of baseline strategies for dealing with toxins and also digestion and all kinds of other things. So just that's my little rant on liver because it's more important than we give it credit for, I think.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
when you get on a soapbox. That was a great soapbox moment. All right. I'm gonna pass this one to you because I clearly cannot enunciate very well tonight. Can you please give the long form or the fancy form of NR and NMN?
Oh God.
Oh no, am I gonna put you on the spot too?
Well, NR is easy, right? It's nicotinamide riboside.
Hmm.
NMN, I think, is nicotinamide mononucleotide, something or other that starts with an N.
Yeah.
Uh, there's so many precursors, and they're all really hard to
Yeah.
pronounce. So,
Yeah.
someone in the comments, go ahead and one up me. You have my permission to do that.
Yeah, no, yes to that, and they all tend to be kind of precursors or B3 derivatives or all the fun things that are kind of the hacky way to get there. All right. Paul has another question, and this is in regards to sleep, because we've talked a lot about sleep today and how it impacts mitochondria and aging in general. He's saying that he wakes up several times an evening, sometimes two, sometimes five, unfortunately, due to prostate and bladder issues. He's currently doing some medications for both. And I would speculate there wasn't really a question, but more in the sense of what is the impact of this, right? And so, Paul, I don't know if we're going to be able to give you a full comprehensive answer because we need to know a bit more detail around the health history. I would say I'd be curious to see how the medications help. I would also say don't don't sacrifice the good for the perfect, right? There's an element, especially as we get older, there's going to be something within the body that maybe has broken, and we're going to be working on repairing. And it doesn't serve you to stress over not getting perfect sleep, so long as maybe you work with someone who knows sleep really well and you can figure out maybe how to do better sleep cycles within the periods you're able to get. Or is there a different relationship you can have with certain liquids? Is there a different relationship you can have with some of these medications? I think a lot of this is solvable. Working with a practitioner would be really, really helpful. In particular, one who really understands sleep cycles and can help you kind of be creative with how you go about your sleep until you get some of that prostate bladder urgency under control so that it's not disrupting your evening. Um, Justin, any other thoughts around that? Did I miss anything?
Yeah, just because there's so many ways to impact circadian rhythm. I would
Mm,
say that when it comes to bladder issues, I mean, mineral balance really matters a lot
mhm,
there as well, and the timing of that very last bit of
mm,
fluid that you take
mm,
in also really matters. Like for me, that was a game changer when I made like a cutoff point for my fluid intake because it wasn't because of a bladder issue, right? So it wouldn't be as severe as yours, but it was definitely one of those things where it's like your body will not let you sleep if you think you have to pee, right? Like you're going to
mhm.
wake up. That's just when we were kids, we would just pee the bed, but now we have to get up. So um, I think that
Oh,
if you
how we
have,
miss those days.
oh God, so much less pressure. Um, when we have a lot of fluid and we don't have enough minerals, that makes it so that it tends to pass through a lot
Mm,
quicker as well. Right.
mhm,
So the last, little bit of fluid that you have, you may want to introduce some magnesium or something with a lot of minerals to it as well, just because then your body will sort of hold on to the fluid a little more as opposed to getting rid of it. But once again, I mean, I would recommend all of the circadian rhythm stuff as well is going to matter a lot there. And we've done pretty much a full series on sleep as well. We've done a few pretty
mhm.
good webinars on that. So if you had a
Hmm,
moment, go back and check out those webinars because there may be some gems of advice for the sleep quality in the
mhm.
first place.
I love it. Merci beaucoup, monsieur. All right.
Hmm.
Kevin, I love this question. Kevin. Okay. Kevin's asking the question of have you heard of Augmented NAC for long haul COVID? It's created by an Italian group of researchers. You heard about it talked about on a John Campbell podcast. Um, I have not, but I love when audience brings forward things I have not heard of. So for audience context, um, NAC is profoundly important to the recovery of long haul COVID for reasons that are outside of just detox. It's a cofactor in regulation of the blood-brain barrier that gets dysregulated in long haul COVID. So bringing in NAC very specific to long haul is really helpful in reestablishing the blood-brain barrier, which is very compromised of consequence to long haul COVID. So no, I have not heard of augmented NAC. I'm very excited now. I'm going to go look it up. Justin, have you heard of it?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Hmm.
But as far as I think it's a relatively new thing, but NAC, we have always recommended that as a glutathione precursor, and it makes
Mm.
sense that they would be dabbling in it for things like long haul COVID. Also, Dr. Mercola has like a whole protocol for kind of clearing spike proteins out of the body as well. And that's worth looking at if you suspect that you're suffering from that, like long haul COVID. The more you can detox, the better, as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned with that, because it is a tricky
Yeah.
one.
I'd also offer to we're starting a long haul program within DNA Company because people tend to be struggling so much with it. And there's an element of it's difficult to do on your own, in particular because of some of the brain fog or the fatigue. So, Kevin, I don't know if this is relevant to you, but you or anyone else who's on here, don't hesitate to reach out to us if you're interested. We can send information on that program for you. Yeah. All right. Let's see. The next question we have here is Johanna? Jonna? I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. Um, do you know how do you know what dose of omega-3 is right for your body? And then they're asking, is 2.1 grams too much at one time? Justin, do you want to take this guy?
When it comes to omega-3 supplementation, one of the main things to be aware of is really not so much the volume of omega-3s as it is omega-3 to 6 ratio is really the most important kind of factor there. Mega doses of omega-3s can be a little bit problematic because of the blood thinning properties. So I don't make a baseline recommendation of taking lots and lots of omega-3s because some people already have like blood that's on the thinner side. If it's on the thicker side, that might be a good strategy to help thin it out. That's drug free. 2 grams really isn't crazy. I mean, I know people who take like 10 grams per day, albeit they don't do it all at once. It's like two, two, two. Like they'll kind of stack their way up to 10, but that's quite a bit. I think 2 grams is actually pretty reasonable. What I always recommend is that we need to subtract omega-6 sources in our diet as well and try to get the best ratio possible. And it depends what type of omega-3s as well. A lot of people supplement with these omega-3 6/9s. I'm not a big
Mhm.
fan of that because like omega-6s are so prevalent in the diet as it is. Even people that are on like a really good paleo diet, just the almonds and the olive oil and stuff, they end up still pretty high with the omega-6 content.
Mm.
So if you're going to do that, just make sure that they're actual omega-3s. Make sure it, dark bottle. Try to get one that has glycerin for the capsule because our bodies are typically, our diets are glycerin deficient, right? So you may benefit from adding a little bit of that in. When I'm not using the fatty 15, I mean, I also use the Kion omegas because he has like rosemary extract and stuff added in as well, because oxidation is a really big problem with omega-3s. But I think 2.1 grams is not outrageous unless you're an infant. That would be significant, but I doubt that you are. So yeah, 2.1 I think is okay. I wouldn't say that's overdosing. Dr. K, do you have a different opinion on that?
I'm really hoping there's an infant typing us a question now. No, I thought you had a great opinion there, but just the visual of an infant engaging with this makes me very happy. And I kind of wish Johanna was an infant now. Apologies, you're probably an adult. All right. The next question we have is from Sandy. Are there any drawbacks to taking I'm not sure if I'm going to say this right. Help me out. Acromyces, correct? I got that.
Akkermansia.
There we
Pretty good.
go. That's why we pay you the big bucks. Thank you. I've heard it can have some good effects, but also can have some negative impacts, in particular for people with MS or multiple sclerosis. And Sandy's saying that they do have this. So, ac whatever Justin said.
AKK.
It's Thank you. It is a darling of the probiotic world insofar as it's really showing a lot of supportive gut barrier. It's showing a lot of supportive immune function. It shows really, really positive things, metabolic wellness, anti-inflammatory. It's kind of become a panacea. People are like, oh, this cures all. Um, the drawback, and I think this is what Sandy's getting at, is that too much AKK can lend to a weakening or a loosening or a degradation of certain mucosal layers, which then can compromise gut. And there's a theory, and I think there's a few papers that support that, in particular for people with MS, this is some of these layers are already compromised, and of consequence to that, taking this may further compromise, further aggravate the condition. Okay. So do we have a concrete answer of yes or no? But I think there's enough suggestion that if you are someone with MS, you probably do not want to be taking this unless there's a care provider who has evidence of frank deficiency and evidence that this would benefit you. So I would say by and large, I would avoid. And really look at other ways to be supporting your biome. I'll be playing. I'm a bit of a fuddy-duddy. My favorite ways, assuming you're not coming off a course of antibiotics or assuming there's not something dramatic going on, research really shows that food-based probiotics, so the kimchis, the kefirs, the sauerkrauts, the nattos, the delightful Japanese bean, um, those sorts of things, as well as prebiotics, so the fibers that feed our bacteria, they tend to do the best seeding. So I'd really encourage kind of encouraging that route. Um, Justin, any other thoughts there?
Anytime that we add like significant levels of one strain of a probiotic, there's always the potential for creating dysbiosis, right? So
Hmm.
um, there's no reason why when eating food you would have ever got like a huge volume of one particular strain. And there's something called strain dominance that we always want to be aware of, because microbiota are really complicated and they have a relationship with other microbiota, so we don't want to overdo it. I also suggest being really careful with any kind of higher dose probiotics if you may have something like leaky gut going on. Um, any of these strains that might feed a little bit off of mucosal barrier, if it's already compromised, we need to be aware of that as well, right? So I always talk about mucosal barrier assessments and of strengthening up the mucosal barrier with bone broth and glutamine and colostrum if you can handle the dairy. BPC 157, do your research on that one. It's a peptide. But strengthening that up can make it so that all of these things can colonize better, and there's a lot less risk that way. If you do have hyperpermeability of the mucosal layer, it can cause more problems than not when you're supplementing with flora, right? So just be aware of that and make sure that your mucosal barrier is nice and shored up before adding in a bunch of different probiotics, especially at a high dose.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, loves it. Really good call out. I like that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah. Dirk. Dirk,
Hey,
sir.
Dirk.
I haven't seen you in a while. At least I would imagine you've still been on webinars, so it's good to hear from you again. Dirk is a beautifully complex biochemistry question, which I'm going to shorten it down a little bit, Dirk, because I think, unfortunately, this is not the forum for a biochem lecture, but please do engage with some of our DNAU resources, because these questions are the ones that the academics chew up, and we'd love to spit back out some of it to you. But Dirk is really asking, when the body is in more of a fasted state and it's not, you're not taking in food that will give glucose, right? Some of that glucose production is going to go shift over to the liver, and liver does something called gluconeogenesis, which means it makes its own sugar. And so he's asking the question of, the liver can also, or like the body to an extent, if you have surplus of protein, for example, it can also make sugar out of protein. The body's very, very smart in different ways to make its own sugar, because really the mitochondria can only take sugar so that it can create some of these things. So he's asking the question, and Justin, hold me honest, because you may know this better than I do. Can the mitochondria take in protein or amino acids or anything that is not sugar in order to convert it? And I believe the answer is no. I believe the mitochondria relies and requires exclusively on glucose.
Yeah. So it really, when we reduce substrates, right? So when you have the absence of carbohydrates and then the absence of proteins as well, then the body, the liver will increase ketone production so that it can give you a direct fuel. It's like the fourth macronutrient almost, ketones. So they're very useful for a lot of these things. But when we're low on everything, the body can also catalyze muscle tissue, right? So that will actually serve
Mm-hmm.
as the actual like mitochondrial fuel in that moment. So
Mm-hmm.
even then, the mitochondria are actually running on sugar. Um,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if
So,
I really targeted that question properly, but yeah, your body, as you mentioned, Dr. K, is very intelligent and it will strip its own resource to get the sugar it needs. Your body does need glucose, but it can kind of alter out, ketones and glucose at the same
mhm.
time for brain
Yeah.
function and different functions of the body.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a definite intense question. There's a lot to explain with that one because
I
it's
no,
agree
I
with you.
love it. I
It's
love it. These are my favorite questions. I want to be mindful of the audience and also really encourage you to come to some of our DNA stuff because I think that's where these sorts of questions we just have a field day with.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think our last comment of the evening comes from Robin. Um, Robin is mentioning that back in the day, they learned from Andrew. It's wheel, or is it well? Wheel or well?
I think
The
it's
spell?
wheel.
Wheel. Thank you.
Yeah.
Enunciation is not my strong suit, family. It's just I don't do it. I try, it doesn't work out. So here we are. Um, but Andrew, while suggested or taught something that looks a breathing technique. Um, and so it's a breathing technique in particular to promote calmness within the nervous system. So, Robin, I love that you're offering this. So, we'll quickly share it with our audience so that as we let you get on with your day or your evening, whatever time of the world it might be for you, you have something that you have access to. So, the idea is you inhale for 4 counts, you hold your breath for about 7 counts, and then you exhale for 8 counts. And really, that exhale in particular, very massaging of vagus nerve and very massaging and supportive of some relaxation. Some other people will include box breathing in the sense that they'll also have, once you've finished exhaling, you might want to hold that lack of air for another count of 4, but that makes some people feel anxious. So you get to play with a triangle or a square, depending on whatever your poison is. Um, yeah, so thank you for sharing that with us, Robin. We appreciate when our audience is teaching us things. I'm going to go learn about augmented neck. Hopefully, our audience now has access to either triangle or squared breathing. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Thank-
love 478. It's definitely one of
Mhm.
the better, like before bed, that's a great protocol. And like I
Mhm.
mentioned, the inhale tends to be sympathetic and that exhale tends to be
Mhm.
parasympathetic. So the longer you can kind of prolong the exhale, it really targets that aspect of the nervous system and it'll
Yeah.
quiet your brain down and help you get some good
Mhm.
rest. So I'm a fan,
Mhm.
definitely.
Love it. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us. We show up to support you and to help you understand all of the things that are going on within this crazy little world that are related to stress. And we're grateful that you're here. Justin, good sir, I learn from you every time, and I'm very grateful when you come and you spit out all your Justinisms because it helps me embed some of your wisdom in my brain. So thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
Ditto. I appreciate you and I appreciate everybody on the call. Thanks so much for rolling up.
Yeah. After these, we tend to send out surveys of like, hey, what did you like? What did you not like? What do you want to see more of? Please hear them. Please respond. We do this to serve you. So we'd love to know how to serve you better. Okay. And I think on that note, we dance out because dancing is the best form of happiness inducing exercise. So au revoir, mes amis. Au revoir.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.